Okay, so first of all, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many friends here and new faces, new names. I'm Jocelyn Alcott. I'm a professor of history and international comparative studies, and I currently serve as the director of the program in gender, sexuality, and feminist studies here at Duke University. I first want to acknowledge that I am joining you, and I will put a link in the chat here. I am joining you from the unceded tribal territories of several First Nations, including Siouan-speaking Ino, Shakori, and Achushir people who came to be affiliated with the Okanichi and Saponi nations, as well as the Iroquoian-speaking Tuscarora Nation. I put links in the chat box so you can learn more about the histories, cultures, and current activities of these peoples. Today's event forms part of an ongoing international interdisciplinary collaboration on revaluing care in the global economy. And I actually will also put the link to that project in the chat box for people to check out, which we launched a few years ago. The project started from a recognition that we've been talking about the maldistribution of care work for over a century. And for at least half a century, there has been a robust body of research and critical thinking across disciplines, including extensive data collection, various metrics and indices, and reams of essays decrying the fact that care work remains badly undervalued in all senses and falls overwhelmingly to women, particularly racially or ethnically marginalized women. And this is the case pretty much around the world. I mean, this is a nearly universal phenomenon. The standard repertoire of solutions, state, market, and technology-based approaches have barely made a dent in the problem, as we're seeing in the United States with the current congressional debates about the Build Back Better Act. Even these small gains are very, very hard won. So we launched this project in 2018 to see if we could find ways to open up this question of valuing care, to think about it from new perspectives. That is to say, it's a problem we've been talking about for a long time, and we were looking for ways to really kind of bust it open. We focus on three principal research areas. First, metrics, how to measure care and how it affects care when we try to measure it. Second, governance, or how laws and policies both foster and reflect normative values of care. And finally, social practices. So how various practices and social formations inform attention to care, as well as corollaries to care, such as surveillance and control. We've also started from two fundamental premises that have become even more evident in the current moment. First, that social, cultural, and ecological care are all interdependent and imbricate. And second, that innovative solutions to the so-called crisis of care can be found in many corners of the world, particularly those that have been most suspicious of the standard repertoire of market and technology-based solutions. Today's event forms part of a larger project that includes a series on visualizing care, which includes online exhibitions and conversations with artists about how to represent care, how to make care more visible, and how to defamiliarize what we understand to be care. If you'd like to know more about the upcoming events and are not already on our mailing list, because everybody needs a little more email, please feel free to drop your address in the chat box and we will add you to our distribution list. The Revaluing Care in the Global Economy project has enjoyed broad support at Duke, in particular from the Office of Global Affairs and the Basque Connections program. And we particularly want to thank the Mellon-funded Humanities Unbounded program, which supports the Revaluing Care in the Global Economy Lab, as well as today's event. And of course, I want to thank Julie Winmore, the program coordinator in the program for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies, who's provided administrative support for this event. So now I'm going to turn things over to Tanya Rispoli. Hold on for one more link in the chat here. Tanya has a PhD in philosophy from, PhD in philosophy from the University of Rome and is currently a PhD candidate in Romance Studies at Duke. She has already published more than many tenured faculty members and is an indispensable part of the Revaluing Care project. Her own research explores digital feminisms and technologies of care, pushing beyond the Manichaean dichotomies of techno-optimism and techno-pessimism to consider the ways that technologies both shape and have been shaped by feminist and political traditions since the 1970s. It is always a joy to collaborate with Tanya, and I'm particularly looking forward to this event. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Tanya Rispoli. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for your introduction, and hi everyone. Thank you to you all for coming to this event and to the speakers for agreeing to have this conversation around the revaluing care in the global economy, post-work imaginaries. We chose a particularly challenging designation for launching this event, given that all the terms of its title, care, value, post-work, and imaginary, would need more than one seminar to be discussed satisfactorily. However, what we had in mind was to open up a space to reflect all together on the problem, to borrow Arturo Escobar's term, of how we imagine transitions in a time of a crisis that is at the same time ecological, political, social, and technological. These different and multiple transitions seems very much needed in the times of the COVID-19 pandemic and of the climate change crisis, since they all show a profound instability, deadliness, and injustice of the current capitalist system. At the same time, very little has changed since the beginning of the pandemic. And all over the world, ecological, feminist, anti-racist, and indigenous movements have been reclaiming a more equitable society. The essential labor of healthcare workers, teachers, workers of the logistics and distribution is still dramatically undervalued, while the drive towards relentless performance, the subtle invitation to constantly branding ourselves, and in Jonathan Crairy's terms, to even work 24/7, appears unchallenged. Exhaustion and often loss of hope seems the common feelings across several regions of the world for many people, especially women and underrepresented minorities. How do we refuse this system? And how do many groups and communities across the world are actually refusing it? The idea of focusing on post-work imaginaries comes from the need to rethink the practice of refusal towards alternative futures. For centuries, workers have refused their tasks through walkouts or wildcat strikes. However, it was in a particular moment of history during the 70s in Italy that the idea of the refusal of work has been elaborated as a strategy to transform the subjectivity of the social or post-Fordist worker and their form of life through collective and community engagement. Work that has been traditionally understood as a site of fulfillment and expression of individuality, and this is even more true in the neoliberal era, has been seen by autonomous Marxism as a site of a moral injunction that channels our approach to the world and limits our collective creativity. As Cathy Weeks shows in The Problem with Work, Feminism, Marxism, Anti-Work Politics, Post-Work Imaginaries, the wages for housework movement built on the white social movements of the 70s, emphasizing the value and the productivity of what at that time was not considered as labor, namely all the activities related to care, such as home cooking, child rearing, building relationships, communities and network, and so on and so forth. Today, in this panel, we will speak about work in this expanded sense, including, and I quote, all the activities that we use to maintain and repair our world, end of quote, as in the traditional definition of care by Fisher and Thornton, but also looking at all the actual forms of work, from effective and manual labor to sex work and automated work. Many scholars emphasize the challenge of imagining a future within capitalism, given that it is an economic and social system that colonizes all the outsides, including non-human nature and several, if not all, regions of the world. However, a few years ago, Arturo Escobar invited us to look at the pluriverse of designs produced by indigenous communities, especially in Central and South America, that imagined and designed a different world oriented toward the interconnectedness between human and nature. Also, Cathy Weeks contended that some utopian demands, such as those of wages for and against housework, for universal basic income, for the reduction of working hours, are not blueprints of the good society in her terms, but, and I quote again, a variety of partial glimpses and of incitements towards the imagination and construction of alternatives, end of quote. They are, to borrow Ernest Bloch's definition, concrete utopias. How can we imagine through struggles, demands, and designs some utopian futures while actually building alternative worlds? What will be the temporality of this world making, and what will be the activities that we will finally revalue? Now, with these questions in mind, I want to leave the floor to the speakers, starting from Hester, who is Professor of Gender, Technology and Cultural Politics at the University of West London. Her research interests include techno-feminism, social reproduction, and theories of work. She's the author of Beyond Explicit, Pornography and the Displacement of Sex and Xenofeminism. She leads the Feminist Future program for the think tank Autonomy. I want to thank you, Helen, for joining us today and rehearse how important is your work on alien feminisms, especially for the fields of digital and techno-feminisms, and for rethinking work and post-work. Helen builds her theoretical genealogy on Firestone's dialectic of sex, showing how technologies are always ambivalent. They could be instruments, and I quote, towards furthering the control and domination of laboring bodies, but also for reinventing alien futurities. A reflection is particularly relevant to frame the problem of automation. Why in the era of informational and automated capitalism, we still work so much? Is automation a tool for further extracting, exploiting, and wasting labor, or it is a way for liberating us from work? Please join me in welcoming Hester.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really such a privilege to be here, and thank you so much for that kind introduction too. So I should probably start with just a quick apology. Given the general framing of the project of which this sort of event is a part, I should really apologise for the relative inattention paid to issues of care in this talk. It's something that I discussed with Tanya in advance of this event, and it's sort of ironic that I'm not talking about it because I've got a whole book coming out which is all about sort of post-work approaches to care. There's an alternative version of this talk that's about 3 times as long, which really digs into some of the issues around care. But instead, I'm kind of focusing on automation, its place in post-work, and sort of responses to that. So I want to talk about the role of technology within post-work politics. I've got about 10 minutes to do this, so it's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. And I want to point to 3 key criticisms of post-work's account of automation, and then stress why, despite these criticisms, I still think post-work is an important and helpful critical tendency. So first things first then, what do I mean by post-work politics? And Tanya is entirely right. There could be a whole seminar, a whole series of seminars just on this question. But in my view, post-work incorporates a variety of strategies, perspectives, and worldviews that do not always agree with each other, and which may, in fact, exist in a state of tension. And this can make it really tough to debate post-work projects without generating confusion and without talking past one another. However, while these projects each have their own kind of distinctive flavour, they nevertheless hold certain key ideas in common. They respond to changing labour conditions, often seeking to confront rising inequality, the erosion of autonomy, and ever more precarious working arrangements. They typically critique the idea that work is capable of delivering prosperity, purpose, and social equality, and argue instead that the left needs to resist wage labour and the work ethic as part of a proactive response to the current crisis. Post-work theorists tend to frame work as a problem rather than a solution, and suggest that we must seek to be emancipated from rather than through our labour. And it's this kind of broad idea, I would argue, that creates at least a loose set of family resemblances between the thinkers and ideas that have come to be associated with post-work. So what is the role of technology here? Despite the baggy set of criteria which have come to characterize post-work, technology has emerged as perhaps a particularly visible factor in the identity of this tendency. Indeed, an embrace of automation has come to be viewed as perhaps the defining attribute of contemporary post-work discourse, and it's something to which post-work's most strident critics frequently return. So Anna Dinnerstein and Frederick Pitts, for example, describe post-work as consisting of three primary positions. So, quote, first, the development of information technology is accelerating. Allied with crisis tendencies in the current phase of capital accumulation, this terminates in a post-capitalist future. Second, dynamics of automation and the new cooperative commons potentiate a post-work society of abundance and leisure. Third, progressive left politics must surpass limited, reactive and parochial folk politics, reconfiguring itself around a populist hegemonic post-work agenda, demanding reduced working hours, full automation and a UBI, end quote. So three attributes then, all of which contain some reference to technology or automation. And this tells us something about contemporary perceptions or perhaps caricatures of post-work. For many, the technologization of labour is post-work's flagship idea. And it is worth noting that this understanding of post-work is not entirely without basis. Many of the texts that have come to be most prominently identified with this tendency point to the role of technology in reshaping labour practices. And some argue that tendencies towards automation and the replacement of human labour should be enthusiastically accelerated and targeted as a political project of the left. And automation has been really central to a lot of the kind of playful sloganeering around this position as well. So fully automated luxury communism is both the title of Aaron Bastani's recent book and a long-standing meme, sometimes taking the modified form of fully automated luxury gay space communism. And at the same time, the front cover of Nick Cernicek and Alex Williams' Inventing the Future features this programmatic slogan, demand full automation. Given the high profile enjoyed by automation in this context, I think it's worth pausing to consider some of the ways in which the analyses offered by these kinds of post-work thinkers can be problematic, or even just flat out wrong. In a highly rigorous and carefully evidenced argument about technology and the future of work, Aaron Benanav looks at the claim that, for good or ill, automation is on track to eradicate substantial amounts of human labour. According to his analysis, today's automation discourse, a current that includes tech-centric post-work thinkers and sort of assorted other futurologists, can be seen as a response to a real trend unfolding across the world. There are simply too few jobs for too many people. This chronic labour under demand is manifest in economic trends such as jobless recoveries, stagnant wages, and rampant job insecurity. However, he suggests that it would be misguided to chalk this up to the rise of the robots, not least because the countries with the most industrial manufacturing robots are not the ones with the fewest humans employed in industrial manufacturing. This is the first thing that a particularly high-profile facet of post-work thinking gets wrong. According to Benanav, what automation theorists describe as the result of rising technological dynamism is actually the consequence of worsening economic stagnation, following on decades of manufacturing overcapacity and underinvestment. In other words, as economic growth decelerates, rates of job creation slow, and it's this, not technology-induced job destruction, that has depressed the global demand for labour. To the extent that post-work politics assumes we're kind of already hurtling towards an automated future, then we must agree that it is pretty fundamentally flawed. A second objection to post-work and its demand for full automation concentrates on something like its focus or its scope. Although arguing forcefully for the importance of freedom from work, for example, and pushing against any idea that people should be compelled to sell their labour at all, the philosopher Martin Hadland suggests that we must look beyond the reorganisation of work and change our fundamental conception of value if we want a more just future. He notes that the key to the critique of capitalism is the revaluation of value. The foundation of capitalism is the measure of wealth in terms of socially necessary labour time. In contrast, the overcoming of capitalism requires that we measure our wealth in terms of socially available free time. Helen follows Marx in pursuing this line of thinking with reference to efficiency-enhancing technologies, technologies which, when put to use in the service of a capitalist conception of value, are inevitably used to increase output rather than to reduce workloads. As long as our measure of wealth is socially necessary labour time, machine technologies cannot produce any value for us by virtue of their operations. The technologies that could make us wealthier, that could give us more time to lead our lives, are instead employed to exploit human labour, even when such labour is not needed. If we measured our wealth in terms of socially available free time, however, machines would produce value for us by virtue of their own operations, such is Hagelin's claim. Any post-work position on automation, this reading suggests, will fail to foster genuine transformation if it's not coupled with a radical rethinking of what constitutes value. And the final criticism of post-work that I want to touch on relates to the fact that a politics of technologically facilitated working time reduction is not in and of itself a sufficient basis for a developed emancipatory politics. As Alain Badiou points out in his response to Inventing the Future, while the shortening of the work week is a highly desirable proposal, post-capitalism must be defined not by the end of work, but by the end of private property. He notes that private property can be extended to all forms of automation, and that this appropriation of all forms of technology by the system of private property is at the heart of the matter, before going on to argue that any reinvention of the future must start from this point, rather than from attempts to automate work. So to quote Badiou here, we can say that it is not a necessity that the key of social organisation lies in private property and monstrous inequalities. And we must affirm that we can organise limited experiences for the moment which demonstrate that it is not a necessity, that it is not true that forever private property and monstrous inequalities must be the law of the becoming of humanity, end quote. So if post-work draws on the idea that capital can become labour, then it would certainly be inadvisable to concentrate on labour to the exclusion of capital. So to summarise these critiques then, post-work 1 misinterprets the role of automation in the current global undersupply of work. 2 does too little to address the issue of value, which heavily shapes how the forces of production are operationalised. And 3 fails to properly account for the role of private property in shaping the dynamics of technologies. So how can a post-work advocate or fellow traveller respond to these not inconsiderable problems? Is the post-work project fundamentally doomed in consequence of this take on automation? So I'd like to finish off by offering some brief responses. Now, specifically, in relation to the first critique, we can note that while some of post-work's discussion of technological unemployment may indeed misconceive of the reasons behind chronic global labour under demand, said under demand is nevertheless still an issue. Indeed, as Benanav argues, automation theorists have at least focused the world's attention on the real problem of a consistently low demand for labour. They have also excelled in efforts to imagine solutions to this problem that are broadly emancipatory in character. So there is still much to be gleaned from post-work theorists, it would seem, even if the starting point for their analyses can sometimes be a little bit wide of the mark. Besides, post-work projects also have motivations entirely independent of changes in the labour market. The culture of work is seen as something to be resisted, whether or not robots are currently taking our jobs. A further, more general defence is to note that, despite its high profile, the call for automation is far from the be-all and end-all of post-work politics. Amongst critics, as we've seen, post-work is often constructed as inseparable from, or maybe even identical to, the call for automated production. This characterisation, however, can only hold if one is willing to overlook other tendencies and exclude a number of thinkers from the post-work canon. So let's take the work of Kathy Weeks as one of several possible examples here. Published in 2011, The Problem with Work, Feminism, Marxism, Anti-Work Politics and Post-Work Imaginaries really, I think, popularized the notion of post-work thinking in this century and is widely cited, and deservedly so. The strength and the influence of Weeks's text would seem to position it at the very heart of contemporary post-work politics in the Anglophone nations. It calls for a shorter working week, it calls for universal basic income, but talk of full automation and largely talk of technology in general is absent from the text. One can only frame post-work as a perspective wedded to technological acceleration if one willfully ignores Weeks's influence here, and more generally, if one neglects the fundamentally various nature of post-work as a political and critical tendency. Automation prognostications need not necessarily inform post-work writing then. And even those texts that do foreground ideas of full automation frequently retain a focus on political struggle. In my experience, authors in the contemporary Anglophone post-work tradition do not typically presume that a reduction in waged work or the erosion of the work ethic will come easily, but in fact recognize the necessity of labour struggles. Even Inventing the Future, which is read by many critics as being sort of broadly techno-optimist, repeatedly stresses that its project is more political than technical. More crucial than any of this, though, is the need to reject the idea that post-work politics is little more than a collection of policy proposals, be these for a shorter working week, for a universal basic income, or for greater automation of labour. Such a framing misses what is most crucial for the project, the ends towards which it strives. Many post-work thinkers, so Weeks, Cernick and Williams and others, are making the case for why the reduction of toil could and should guide our political visions of the future. When they make demands or propose concrete actions, these are typically seen as steps toward a larger goal, the goal being no less ambitious than human flourishing, rather than being seen as kind of endpoints in and of themselves. So let's just sum up. Post-work politics has understandably been associated with the call for and the expectation of full automation, and with the limitations that such a politics involves. However, not all elements of post-work concern themselves with automation, and many of those that do may still provide us with useful conceptual resources. Finally, it would be an error to reduce post-work to simple agitation for automation, or indeed to any single concrete demand. At its heart, post-work is not a self-contained program of neatly numbered steps, but a radical orientation toward freedom, or at least the version of post-work that I think is worth pursuing. As Cernick and Williams put it, the ambition here is to take back the future from capitalism and build ourselves the 21st century world we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen, for this brilliant intervention around the problem of how do we think post-work with and beyond the theories of automation. I find particularly relevant your idea of rethinking value beyond the problem of socially necessary labor and toward a definition of wealth that includes also free time. This project also rethinks the problem of post-work beyond private property and toward reimagining an ethics and the politics of post-work. Thank you so much, Helen, for your great contribution. I want to flag that at the end of the interventions, you will have the possibility to pose questions to our speakers. So please, I invite you to write them in the chat or to speak up after the end of the first round. Now I'm going to introduce Heather Berg, who writes about sex, work, and social struggle. Her first book, Porn Work, explores workers' strategies for navigating and subverting precarity. Her writing appears in the journals Feminist Studies, Science, South Atlantic Quarterly, and many others. Heather is assistant professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies at Washington University in St. Louis. We want to warmly thank you, Heather, for joining us today. In our network and courses at Duke, we discussed in depth your article, An Honest Day's Wage for a Dishonest Day's Work, Reproductivism and Refusal. And we are interested in your arguments about rethinking care beyond the boundaries of the community. And I was just reading in these days your fantastic book, Porn Work, in which you emphasize how sex work, more than other forms of work, shows how precarity intervenes in blurring the boundaries between life and labor. You also reflect through Federici, Dalla Costa, James, and many others on the possibility of having wages for porn work and ultimately UBI, Universal Basic Income, for all of us. Welcome, Heather, to this event.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to you, Tanya, and to Jocelyn for your organizing labors. I'm really such an admirer of everyone on this panel. And also just looking at the guest list today, it's just full of some of my favorite thinkers. So I feel really lucky to be in your company. And it's really just in time for this moment in this semester, and maybe also world historically, when I think so many of us are yearning for an otherwise. So I'll focus my comments today on the question of sex work after the future and on what sex workers' critiques might offer left struggles to get there, to get to those futures. This panel's guiding question, how can we imagine society after capitalism and its specific model of work, is particularly loaded in conversations about sexual labor. Civilian, that is non-sex worker leftists, love to pose the question as a way to kind of trick sex workers into admitting that the work is a uniquely terrible job. Even if we agree that all waged work must end, there's often an idea that sex work can and should be the first to go. And that idea informs much of the current discourse on the anti-sex worker left. And it informed socialist state builders historically who struggled to abolish prostitution, even as other things that looked and felt like waged work maintained. The limits of those state builders' own post-capitalist imaginations are, I think, a cautionary tale for the kind of imaginative work that we need to do now. The sex workers were toxic to working class solidarity in Alexandra Kolontais' version of Russia's post-revolutionary future, for example. And they were also labor deserters, and I'm going to return to that conceit. Contemporary anti-sex worker leftists look back really longingly on this history. In response, some sex worker thinkers choose discursive tactics that in some ways meet the anti-sex worker left on its own terms. The argument goes like, we do this work because we have bills to pay, and criminalization only makes things worse. But sex exchange won't exist in the futures we want to build. Then there's often an effort to sort of conscript anti-sex worker liberals into the anti-capitalist struggle through their whorephobia. So then the argument goes like, if you want sex work to wither away, destroy the system that makes us pay to survive. Other sex worker thinkers refuse the question of sex work in the future, redirecting to a focus on workers' struggles now. In most of my writing, I've tried to follow their lead, but I'm not sure this is the right move. I do think that the left needs a vision for where we want to go in order to get there. And I think the question of sex work in post-capitalist futures matters for building post-capitalist utopias and for making sense of our conditions in the present. It does a lot of heavy lifting as a kind of test for whether one believes that good sex is free and good work is productive. So 4 years into the project of Soviet statecraft, Kalantai refused to, quote, prophesy the form that marriage and relationships between the sexes will assume in the future. But she was willing to prophesy that sex workers would not be part of that future. The trouble is not just that this writes sex workers out of the revolution, and particular irony, perhaps because sex workers have often funded those revolutions with their labor, but also that productivism gets to remain in this vision. And also the kind of fetish for free and authentic sex is, of course, a cornerstone of bourgeois social relations. So I'm interested in the kind of imaginings that get to keep both in place. I don't think we can get to another kind of future so long as productive work and free sex maintain their place. And that's why in imagining what that future should look like, I want to depart from those thinkers who hope that that future would be free of sex exchange, even as I join them in wanting to see the wage relation destroyed. Part of this is because I think Kalantai was onto something in imagining sex work as a kind of work refusal. That's because sex workers have long used sex work to avoid more tedious, more extractive, and more injurious work in the world of straight or civilian jobs. Porn workers in my book, for example, talk about using sex work as an alternative to retail, food service, even academia. The work still grinds, so it stops far short of the kinds of everyday utopias this panel is yearning for. But it does do some of what we'll need to do to build those utopias. And for some people, some of the time, it helps grasp at some of what life a little less ensnared by capitalist social relations might offer. For people with disabilities, for example, sex work can make it possible to survive away from some of the exclusions, harms, and violences of straight jobs. For people who hate dealing with a boss, it can mean some freedom from managerial control. And for those who need out of nuclear families that harm, sex work can be a kind of escape hatch. The sex worker poet Aaron Taylor writes, quote, "When I found a tunnel out of reality, I took it." Sex workers' networks of mutual aid and community self-defense, meanwhile, point to what it might look like to take care of each other outside of and against the state. And this gets us, I think, to this panel's question of what designing a post-capitalist society would require. I'm suggesting that sex workers are daily experimenting with building that alternative way of living. And I also want to argue that the thinking on the sex worker left contains theoretical tools that can help build post-capitalist worlds that do all they promise to. Some things that I'll highlight there. Sex work performs explicit negotiations around what comes from sex. And I do think that that threatens to unsettle the murky, non-explicit expectations that preserve the bourgeois family form. Porn workers talk about pay as the thing that makes heterosex worth it, for example. And I'm interested in what sexual futures might come from having those more explicit conversations along those lines. At its best, sex worker thought also undermines the work ethic. This caveat, at its best, is because plenty of sex work discourse does perform work ethics in a bid for respectability, as your own Kathy Weeks has written about. I'm inspired by those who refuse this move, thinkers like Femi Babylon and Lorelei Lee, who write about how sex work can make space for the right to be lazy in the here and now, and maybe also after the future. Sex worker thought can also perform a really striking refusal of what I've called reproductivism. It's a politics that bids for labor rights and recognition through appeals to the social value of a job. So where teachers and nurses, for example, have to navigate the impossible terrain of workers' interests bound up with those of consumers, sex workers sometimes use the general disdain for what they're imagined to reproduce as a shield from those discourses. What would labor struggles look like more broadly if they took on the sex worker radicals' insistence that the value of sex work begins and ends with that it reproduces sex workers? What forms of refusal open up is a question I'm interested in here. And what forms of social blackmail close down? This links up, I think, with our panel's grounding in the present moment and in questions of essential work and its discontents. It's emphatically not the feminist demand for a more caring society, where the discourse of care tethers our demands to those of clients and makes work harder to refuse. I do think we can get to a truly collective version of this, maybe after the future, but I don't think it can be part of a transitional program. What I'm arguing then is that if more of us talked about paid and unpaid productive and reproductive work in the terms sex worker radicals sometimes do, we might be able to get to the work of building another world quicker. And we might run into fewer traps where new economic projects end up reproducing the trappings of old ones. So I just want to close with an excerpt from a piece that echoes, I think, some of this panel's preoccupations. This is from the Clandestine Whores Network. It's called Beneath Everything. So I'll quote now. We will not wait until we are told how we can live our fantasies, how we can hold our bodies in new ways. This is a future with a revolutionary horizon beyond the violent contradictions of a world we wish to leave behind. We will still have to work, but our survival, safety, and autonomy have been radically altered through the struggle to such a degree that the world we live in is a distant vision. We understand if we get organized, this is what we could have, not only for ourselves, but for everyone. Thank you. I'll pop that in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing this quote and for your talk. And thank you for your work in general. It seems that through sex work, we can not only rethink the struggles and the strategies for refusal beyond reproductivism, but we can also think about a different way of producing sexual relationships, also toward, to borrow a couple of terms from Pete Siegel and Jennifer Nash, beyond the erotics of racism and coloniality. So how sex work help us to rethink a new form of erotics and a new form of sexual exchange. Thank you very much, Heather, for your talk again. And now I will turn the microphone to Melanie Yazzie, who is Assistant Professor of Native American Studies and American Studies at the University of New Mexico. She specializes in Navajo American Indian history, political ecology, indigenous feminism, queer indigenous studies, and theories of policing and the state. She also organizes with the Red Nation, a grassroots native-run organization committed to the liberation of indigenous people from colonialism and capitalism. Melanie is author of many wonderful articles that we had the luck to read, which focus on indigenous care economies against and beyond capitalism and patriarchal extractivism, and on the futurity contained in indigenous claims, such as those for climate justice or alternative politics of nature, with a particular focus on primary resources such as water. How indigenous approach to care can help us to imagine a different utopian future. Join me in welcoming Melanie Yazzie. Thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Tanya. Just want to make sure again, can folks hear me? Yeah, okay, great. I'm going to start to time myself to make sure I don't go over. Excellent, there we go. All right, so I'm just going to kind of talk off the cuff a little bit today. I've only begun to do academic writing on the, I typically call it the politics of care, but thinking about care in relationship to a lot of different things, how care is being practiced, theorized, and experimented with in indigenous movements. I mostly focus on indigenous movements in North America, but very much also in conversation increasingly with indigenous movements in the global South. Thinking, for example, with the Cochabamba Agreement coming out of Bolivia and the experiments with political economy oriented around indigenous concepts of care in the theory and the framework of Pachamama, for example, in Bolivia. So very much in that context. I've also started to think increasingly about care in relationship, of course, to I think a strong thread of this program, but also this panel, Marxist feminism and social reproduction theory, where I think the most robust sort of theorizations and conversations about care have been happening, but also in relationship to what I saw a kind of a blossoming conversation last year during the uprising in the United States after George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis in May of 2020 around abolition, right? Abolition became a term that was increasingly common in public discourse. Of course, the rise of mutual aid during the COVID-19 pandemic. Mutual aid also became a concept and a term that was being used fluently in mainstream public discourse. And that in fact, a great deal of sort of the historical transformations in care work and how care work is being applied and theorized and refused and experimented with is actually happening a lot in spaces where mutual aid is being practiced, typically movement, social movement spaces as well, but also in the discourse around prison and police abolition, right? Imagining an alternative future where carcerality and the violence of the inherent violence of statecraft, particularly in a settler white supremacist nation state like the United States. How can we imagine a future without harm, right? How can we imagine a future that's premised upon care and equality rather than racialization, essentially? So it's kind of those three discourses: indigenous movements, Marxist feminism and social reproduction theory, and then also abolition, the discourse and the politics around abolition that really inform how I've been thinking about care. I wanted to share a link really quickly to what I'm going to reference a bit here. But I helped to co-author with other colleagues in the Red Nation actually it just came out in April of this year, a little book. It's a publicly available book. It's not an academic book, called The Red Deal. And the reason why we wrote The Red Deal, we started the project in early 2019 before the pandemic hit. But the reason why we wrote The Red Deal was because we found that there needed to be a more comprehensive indigenous intervention in the larger discourse around climate justice, or around what a just transition, which of course is about labor, right? The question of labor, what a just transition would look like in a settler society where the dispossession of land, the conversion of indigenous land into private property, which of course is the building block of capitalism globally, right? And also structurally, that the dispossession of indigenous land was still not a central feature of how many thinkers, whether they're on the left or they're progressives or they're liberal, politicians in Congress, were thinking about what just transition would look like, but then also what kind of experiments or world-making kind of imaginaries were really central and needed to be more central actually in the climate, in how we envision what climate justice looks like, and the end of our dependency on fossil fuels, which of course is killing the planet, as scientists demonstrate to us. And so we wrote The Red Deal, and a central feature of The Red Deal, here's the book, I'll just show it to you. The central feature of The Red Deal is a discussion about caretaking, and about caretaking specifically in relationship to a politics of labor, but also in relationship to political economy. What often happens, I think, in historically anthropological renderings of thinking about academic knowledge production, renderings of indigenous people, but even I find also often in leftist spaces, non-indigenous left spaces, is that something like the concept of caretaking that's really central to indigenous political imaginaries, whether it's our forms of nationhood and sovereignty, or the types of indigenous sovereignty that we're enacting when we're forming social movements. We're resisting pipelines, right? We're really taking on the infrastructure of extractive capitalism, which is one of the central features of 21st century indigenous resistance in North America, probably also in the global South, especially Latin America, is that somehow our ideas of being in good relation with the earth, right? The idea that we're protecting and defending the land, the notion that we're water protectors and land defenders, is somehow rendered as cultural or spiritual. And I mean, that is something that's very central to kind of the knowledge systems that we hold as indigenous people. But to do so means that what you're doing is you're actually disaggregating what is actually deeply scientific and technological understandings of how we steward the land, right, in a way that is fundamentally different. It's not based on exploitation of the land, right? Whether it's the conversion of land on the commons into private property, or the extraction of raw resources for the accumulation of wealth, right, in other places, whether it's, you know, for settler cities in the region of the Southwest where I live, or for, you know, mass disparities between the global North and the global South. That really what we're talking about when we're talking about caretaking economies as Indigenous people in the Red Deal is that we're interested in fundamentally shifting our relationship with the land that's based on Indigenous science and technology, which is really also the basis of our sort of fundamental political economies that are non-colonial, and that are non-capitalist. And apparently, you know, obviously we live in a capitalist world, or a world completely structured and dominated by capitalism. So they're now transforming to an anti-capitalist, right? They're not just non-capitalist, they're anti-capitalist in this day and age. And so the relationship with land, right, which is so central to Indigenous movements against resource extraction, Indigenous movements to stop fossil fuel production, to curb, you know, this sort of mass extinction drive of capitalist-driven climate change, that relationship with the land is really essential to the care work that we're envisioning as part of this shift in political economy. And that it's not just about burning sage and like singing songs and beating drums. It's actually a very sophisticated theory of political economy that's based on Indigenous, long-standing, heuristically proven Indigenous science and technology in relationship to the stewardship of land and water. And so this is the really strong tradition that we're drawing from in the Red Deal when we're talking about care. And we have the Red Deal is broken into 3 parts, and the last part is called Healing the Planet. And in this, the reason why we wanted to write this section in the book and talk about care is because I think often, again, right, when people think about Indigenous people, we're often sort of pigeonholed, right, in like the culture and the spirituality kind of box. And instead, when we're thinking about how do we heal the planet from climate change, from the mass pollution, right, that capitalist-driven resource extraction has brought to our communities, the high rates of cancer, right, just the general destruction of the earth that has been a consequence, right, of capitalism as a structure and as a system that dominates every horizon of our life and our possibility, our past, our present, and our future, is that what if we thought about jobs, right? This post-work thing is interesting. I don't really participate in those discussions in the left. But thinking about, I'm not really interested in post-work, I'm interested in work and like theorizing the different kinds of work and what kind of work would exist in the future. What kind of work are we engaged in now? And then how is the work we're engaged in now, particularly in movements, right? Building a movement is work, it's labor. It's a kind of care labor that's performed primarily by Indigenous women who've been on the front lines of the struggles I'm talking about, especially for the past decade to 15 years. It's highly gendered, right? Even in social movement spaces, but that the care work, meaning the work we do to care for the land and to care for the water, based on this ethics, right? This care economy, right? That sees the land and the water as a relative. Water is life. Saying water is life means you see the land and the water as a relative. And to be a good relative is an ethics of care work, right, that guides how we go about stewarding the land, stewarding the water, stewarding each other, and stewarding the future. And that if we're trying to think about what work looks like in hopefully a post-capitalist future, it's always what I'm hoping for, then all we need to do is we need to look at what kind of work is being done in the movements now, who is doing that work, and that work, from what I can tell, is largely care work. And it's care work that's related to, of course, the land and the water. It's not necessarily just care work between human beings. It's like a multi-species, essentially, kind of care work. It's an ecological care work. And so when I think about work in the future and the way that we theorize work in the future, like let's say, awesome, I'm at 10 minutes, let's stop that. I'm gonna wrap up here. Let's say, right, we are able to overturn the fundamental social relation that is capitalism, which for indigenous people happens in a lot of different ways, but primarily it happens through the exploitation of resources as a modality of dispossession, of continued colonial dispossession of indigenous land. Let's say we were able to stop that completely. We don't all die from climate change, which is a reality, I think, an existential threat we're all facing. We could create remarkable fleets of jobs for people, indigenous people, racialized folks, migrants, right, in like a place that is currently called the United States, through cleaning up the land, right? You're practicing a type of care work for the land and a type of land and water stewardship that could actually create jobs, right? And so if you're thinking about just transition, which is about how do we make sure that people are able to still have basic dignity, and we give social values still to education and healthcare, infrastructure, those types of things that are usually guaranteed through work, then how do we transform our relationship with work in kind of this future where we're able to actually heal the earth, quite literally heal the earth through things like land reclamation projects and pollution cleanup projects that would also strengthen tribal sovereignty and our ability to actually live and be who we are as indigenous people in our own homelands, which are mostly wastelands at this point that have been wastelanded by extractive capitalism. That this isn't really, this isn't really like a long shot in terms of thinking about how we could actually develop structures of governance and political economies around this type of care work. I'll just close real quickly, like we've gotten a lot of feedback on the Red Deal, and something that we get commonly is like, and I think maybe a lot of leftists or radicals get this too, is that what we are proposing is unrealistic, right? Like this isn't the utopia that you're talking about, or even the concept of a utopia is just not realistic. You're not practical enough. And so something we really wanted to do in the Red Deal was say like, hey, actually you want to talk about just transition from an indigenous perspective that would reinforce like indigenous sovereignty and our ability to, our inherent right, according to the United Nations, to live, with autonomy and self-determination in our own homelands, to speak our languages, and to live free from the violence of colonialism and capitalism. Here's one way you could do it. You could create jobs through land reclamation. It's actually incredibly simple. It's very realistic. And we were really just trying to push back against this idea that utopia is somehow an aspiration and not a reality. And again, just to close, just to remind, sometimes we have to remind ourselves and remind our fellow travelers, and then of course, the pessimists of the world, who are most of the people in the world, who I don't think that another world is possible, right? Is that the things that we're doing in the present, especially those of us who do movement work, social movement work, we are actively experimenting and laying the tracks, right? We're world making in these movements, in addition to, pushing back against state violence and those types of things. There's definitely a negation of the present that's happening in our movements, but there's also an affirmation and an actual building of the futures that we seek to see, once capitalism and imperialism crumble. So that's just what I wanted to share today. Yeah, I'm already over time, like 13 minutes in, but thank you for listening, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you so much for your brilliant intervention. I have tons of questions, and I invite you all to write the questions in the chat for our speakers. I think that what you said around the problem of practicing utopia here and now, and also imagining a post-capitalist society beyond the epistemology of accumulation and extraction is really relevant for our discussion today, as well as your discourse around who are the care givers and the caretaking, and how can we reimagine their work. This will nicely also connect to our next speaker, Arturo Escobar, who does not need a presentation, and it was difficult also to summarize his entire biography and bibliography. Is Kenan Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at UNC Chapel Hill. His wide research interests span from political ecology to autonomous design theory and anthropology of development and social movements. He's author of many wonderful books such as Encountering Development, Territories of Difference, Designs for the Pluriverse Politics, just to mention some of his work. As I said at the beginning of this event, his work has been crucial for revaluing care in the global economy network, especially for rethinking the possibilities of redesigning autonomous and relational futures within our present time. His reflection is especially important in a time in which we hear a lot of discourses around the infrastructures of care. Through his work, we are invited to reflect on designing those infrastructures beyond the politics of the state and capitalist temporality. In this respect, Arturo's concepts and suggestions also invite us to redefine the post of the post-work. So without further ado, help me and join me in welcoming Arturo Escobar. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much, Tanya, for the introduction, and Jolie for the invitation. And I'm really pleased to share this session with Heather and Helen and Melanie as well. There will be connections between the presentations, and I'm sure we can draw some of those in the conversation. Thanks to Melanie for the Red Deal, which is indeed a very sophisticated theory of crisis and transitions in the context of climate change. And I'm going to speak about care, particularly from Latin American perspectives, especially feminist perspectives, and to a certain extent as well, environmental perspectives, indigenous and Black or Afro-descendant perspectives stemming from Latin America today. And again, there will be connections with the other presentations as well. And I want to summarize my remarks with three very short concepts. The first concept is that care is a central element in a larger project of transitions, post-capitalist, post-patriarchal, non-racist, pluriversal, just transitions. Hence, we can define care as a praxis for transitions, or as part of a praxis for transitions. The second statement is that an ontology of care has to be an ontology of radical interdependence, or an ontological perspective on care has to rest on an ontology of interdependence. And the third statement comes from a good Colombian friend, a feminist economist, Natalia Quiroga, and I will write the name on the chat later on, that says that we have to move from an economics of care to an economy and an economics that care. And that has implications for how we think about work and automation and the refusal to work and precarity and so forth, and a different kind of economics and a different kind of economy. So to start with the first one, and there is three concepts that are very centrally emphasized in both Latin American activist sectors and social movements and in critical social theory. And these are the following concepts. The concept of civilizational crisis, the concept of transitions, civilizational transitions, and the concept of interdependence or relationality as a foundation for thinking about transitions. So the crisis is civilizational because it's a crisis in a particular mode of existence, heteropatriarchal, colonial, capitalist, and so forth. And the best statement on this crisis today, in my mind, comes from the South American indigenous movement for Buen Vivir, collective well-being, dignified living, that started in the Wallmapu, in the Mapuche territory in the southern part of the continent. And that's the concept of terricide, terricidio. And the concept of terricide, which is very similar to what the Red Deal is also saying, is that we are killing the earth. And as we kill the earth, we kill the conditions for all beings to flourish on the earth. And that we're killing the spiritual ecosystems, not only the physical ecosystems, but also the spiritual ecosystems. So that the consequence of that, or the implication of that, is that we need to develop an ethics and a practice of healing the web of interdependencies that make up the bodies, the landscapes, the places, the territories that we are and that we inhabit. So the second part of that then is that we have to engage in these transitions toward the healing of the web of life. And the third concept is that the real foundation of life really is that of interdependence and interconnectedness, and not, as with the last 500 years of modernity, is not an ontology of separation. It's not a separation between humans and non-humans, between nature and culture, between subject and object, between body and mind. That has been the civilizational project of modernity, but that we need to shift to a different civilizational project based on this foundation of radical relationality, of the interdependence of everything that exists. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. The second point, so I started with the idea that care is a central element in these transitions. The second point is sort of the ontological part of the argument. And this comes mostly from a short book, really, it's not going to be short any longer, that I'm co-writing with two younger feminist colleagues and very good friends, Michal Osterweiler at Chapel Hill at UNC in Global Studies, and Kriti Sharma, a biology postdoc at Caltech. The book is called Designing Relationally, Making and Restoring Life. Making and restoring and restoring, setting life into a story again. And the argument that we try to make in this book is that we have to regain the autonomy over the making of life. And to make that, and that has to do with work as well, of course. How do we redefine work in that context? And that because we have outsourced the making of life to state, corporation, experts, and we have lost the ability then to even imagine what making our own lives would mean again. And so the key concepts here are the concept of that outsourcing of life is part of the active production of the non-relational, the active production of separation, the active production of isolation, the active production of objectifying an ontology of intrinsically existing subjects and objects who do not have relationship to each other, at least not in the way in which relationality suggests that we should think about that relationship. And hence that we have to find support in the many movements that are struggling today to activate politically relational worldviews and relational ontologies. We call that the active production, the political activation of relationality. And these are many movements of care and commoning and degrowth and food sovereignty and water protectors. I mean, there are so many movements all over the world that could be defined, especially those movements that stem along the lines of ontological or environmental conflicts that are also ontological conflicts, that could be defined as engaged in the activation of the political activation of relationality. And so that was the second point that I wanted to make. So how do we move from an ontology of separation to an ontology of interdependence? It has to do with work a lot, and with automation, for instance. What would be a non-objectifying approach to automation and work, even to sex work, to the refusal to work, a non-objectifying that approach that sees the body and to see the human as profoundly really made up by a web of interrelations, and that we adopt an ethics of interrelationships, an ontology of interrelationship, an ontology of interdependence. Hence, the only ethic possible and the only praxis possible really is an ethics and a practice of care. Okay, and the third point, and it's going to be very short, I only have a couple of minutes left, is the concept of shifting from an economics of care, which continues to be important. I mean, it's a project of feminist economics in many ways, but feminist economics is also developing an argument for something that problematizes the economy as a particular modern conception in an even more profound way, and that searches for a different kind of economics based on a relational understanding of the economy, which is that of moving from an economics of care to an economy and an economics in an economics that care. And that has to do with rethinking of economics that I'm not going to be talking about here, but mostly on the lines of social and solidarity economy, degrowth economies, and so forth. Ecological economics is a very important part of this, centered on the question of valuation, and the valuation and valuing is central to everything that the project of care has been doing so far over the past 2 or 3 years of the project. But it has to do, and these are sort of what we see as emerging from Latin American social movements in particular, from the politics of resistance and re-existence by many different groups, certain indigenous groups, Black groups, feminists, environmentalists, and so forth in Latin America, is that they are centered on 6 principles or 6 axes for transitions. And I'm just going to mention those axes to end. If anybody's interested, I can send you something that we have written on this, because I know this is going to be very quick and will almost make no sense stated as such. But the 6 axes are the following. The first one is the recommunalization of social life, faced with a globalization that has been a war on everything collective and everything communal, and individualizing and so forth. Hence, the only possible way forward to a transition is recommunalizing social life. Second, to relocalize many activities, productive activities, certainly food, but you can relocalize many activities, and a lot of relocalization is going on now in the fields of food, energy, architecture, education, health, and so forth. The third one is that the strengthening of autonomies at the local level as the only possible guarantee, if there is one at all, there is none really, that recommunalization and relocalization efforts will have a chance to succeed. The fourth one is something that all Latin American feminisms emphasize, which is that there has to be a simultaneous depatriarchalization, de-racialization, and decolonization of social relations. The fifth one is a reintegration with the earth, with Gaia, with Pachamama, with Mother Earth, in all different ways, so that we transcend finally this separation between humans and non-humans. And the final one is the creation, the promotion of self-organizing networks among transformative alternatives that are emerging in many different parts of the world, worldwide. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I know it was really fast, but I look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Tanya, and everybody else.
Thank you very much, Arturo, for this brilliant talk that you offered to us. I believe that the 6 points to transition for a more just transition could be really relevant for any alternative politics today. And I also believe that you posed a question in your talk to Heather and Helen when you asked how can we rethink sex work or automation beyond the objectification and beyond an ontology of separation. In the meanwhile, also Helen has a question for Melanie, and I invite her to speak up. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's actually inspired by Melanie's presentation, but really it's for everybody, because I think what Melanie was saying really invites us to think about how we characterize work and about what the work in post-work or anti-work refers to or should refer to. And I think this is of interest generally, but perhaps particularly in relation to care, which I think occupies really quite a vexed position in terms of thinking about labour. And I would be really keen to hear the other speakers and the audience elaborate on what work means for them and when it is more or less politically helpful to define activities as work. Because I also think, you know, there's one side of this where it's actually worth noting that withdrawing one's labour can be an act of care. So just one example that's at the top of my mind right now is that many of my colleagues in the university and college union, both academic and non-academic staff alike, are currently on strike. So my uni didn't meet the threshold to strike, but my colleagues are withdrawing their labour not only to protect their own pay and conditions, but also those who have steady jobs are supporting colleagues in precarious working arrangements. So it's an act of solidarity, which is an act of care in the interests of a collective we. So I just mention the 4 fights here are pay, workload, casualisation and equality. And I'd just like to signal my support and appreciation for my colleagues who are currently withdrawing their labour in this act of care for the future, really, for the sector and for those of us who work in it. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I'm so interested in asking this question of my peers here is that there's been a lot of sort of connection to this idea of concept creep around stuff like emotional labour and how the language of work and labour has been expanded and what counts as work expands to include things which would not fall under perhaps a more conventional definition of labour or even a definition of labour strictly under capitalism. And in my own work, because it's coming from this sort of anti-work or post-work perspective, I tend to be a little bit sort of loose and a bit lazy in terms of how I define work, as in work is a political problem. You know, work is that which is resisted. So a lot of the time, that's my framing of work is sort of around this idea, that which is problematic, that which we might seek to resist, typically can be folded into the concept of work, you know, when it comes to the sort of activities that human beings do. So I think it would be really interesting to hear what people think about this, if it's something that they've thought about in relation to their own work and so on.
Thank you so much, Helen. Who would like to start, also keeping possibly in the conversation also the question posed by Arturo, as well as the question posed by Helen on work, on the nature of work. Melanie, can I give you the floor? Yes, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Helen, for that question and kind of that provocation to think a bit more deeply and maybe sharply about what we mean when we use the words work and labor. I also tend to use them quite loosely. And I'm not somebody who sort of I'm not like a labor theorist or a labor historian, right? I think which are often thought of and I think categorized as a type of left knowledge production that holds a really prominent role just within the intellectual and the political traditions of the left. I think the best example I can give that I'm drawing from, which is quite messy and very incomplete in how I'm theorizing or thinking about or defining work/labor, which I don't think are the same things, actually comes from indigenous movements themselves. And so I'm thinking about the Ocheti Shakoi camp. So no dapples are usually a reference that I think that a lot of people remember. It's quite fresh in their memories of kind of a recent indigenous uprising in the North American context. But the kind of work, non-work, refusal to work that happened in that camp, at any given time, the camp fluctuated between several hundreds to almost 20,000 people who were basically living and developing sort of this social experiment and how to live otherwise, how to recommunalize, as Arturo mentioned, and other things. And there was this common story that we heard in Indian country of indigenous people who socioeconomically are at the bottom of that index, people who only are able to get casual work, who are often on unemployment, who live on reservations where there is no work, first of all, right? So who are actually historically and systematically excluded from work as a technology of ongoing colonial violence and dispossession. That whatever work that they were doing, they were working at a gas station, they were working at Walmart, they quit their jobs and then hitchhiked to the No Dapple front lines and decided instead to do what I think is a type of care work. They weren't getting paid for this work, but nevertheless, all of their housing and all of their healthcare needs. You know, they were covered in that camp. They had a strong sense of community. Everyone was fed 3 times a day in communal kitchens, right? And so there was kind of this like, the way that social relations were reconstructed in that camp made the relationship, I think, of those people in our communities, which is the majority of indigenous people in the United States, live in remarkable economic precarity, often don't even have the opportunity to work and desperately want to work. It gave them a chance to work where they weren't being paid a wage, right? They weren't being sort of rewarded in the way that we conceive of work in a sort of a larger capitalist system, but that their work was in direct relationship with the social value that just basic human dignity, right, should be assigned. And so I just think about that as an example in the indigenous context of, it's like being excluded from work and then refusing to work and then working, but then working in a very different relationship in a very different sort of political economic context. And so I think all I'm trying to say is I think it complicates my ideas of work. And I just really appreciate you pushing that, because it's actually going to make me think a bit more clearly about what I mean when I'm using the words work. Labor also, like you said, kind of like the conceptual creeping of labor. I do a lot of work in feminism, and people talk about emotional labor, and actually in movement spaces, people are always throwing the word labor around to describe like remarkably different types of things. And I too get very confused when I hear people use the term labor, because I think they're actually talking about very different things. I think sometimes they're talking about work, for example, but specifically in relationship to care, which is deeply attached to like the feminist project historically, that how we talk about labor, and we actually need to be quite politically specific, I think, when we talk about labor. So yeah, those are just some of my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And while I will pass the floor to Heather, I want just to flag that Shelley Park wanted also to ask a question around the definition of work. And she's also curious about how we are defining leisure. For example, all the time we spend online, social media, shopping, etc., she says, is productive labor that others profit from. As technology blurs the lines between work and leisure, I'm wondering whether this dichotomy is still useful. Thank you very much, Shelley. And Heather, if you want to say something around the definition of work.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to that, and also this great question about what it would look like to move past objectification, just really briefly, and also just say, well, I have the floor. I have another panel at on the hour, so I'll have to just jump off. So I want to apologize to you all in advance for that. This is such a wonderful conversation, and I wish that I could stay, but today is funnily booked. Yeah, I think for me, it becomes important to mark work as production and or reproduction for capital, and to name reproduction of ourselves for struggle as something else. And so, of course, then one gets into the double bind of self-valorization, which is that we can't really separate those things out in the present moment. But I want to do that kind of conceptual work to try to parse those and to try to be really strategic about where we refuse and what forms of care we maintain in order to reproduce ourselves for struggle. I'm also thinking, Melanie, of what you're saying about the kind of murky intersection between exclusion and refusal for people denied work and left out of work. And I just see so many parallels there with sex worker communities, not least because of the obvious overlaps in terms of indigenous folks and sex workers. But I think that how we talk about refusal in spaces of exclusion becomes really murky and rich too. And then in terms of Arturo's question about objectification, I think one of the things that I find so rich about sex work as an object is that sex workers are already really insisting on the ways that the service rendered doesn't mean the same thing for the worker that it does for the consumer. And I think that distinction is really rich. So just one thing to concretize that, I'll talk about an interview that I did for the project that I'm working on now with workers in the sex worker left, and a trans worker who works as a woman, is transitioning, taking hormones right now, talked about just the kind of thrill that he experienced in getting men who imagine themselves to be straight to pay for his gender transition, and this, like, what it kind of means to be in the moment of exchange, and knowing that clients think that they're getting one thing, and know that the thing that this worker is getting on the other end is money for transition. And that's like one, I think, very kind of straightforward example of what that means. But I do think that that can intervene in conversations about sex work and objectification, what it means to be imagined as an object from the outside, but not to be interpolated in that in any way. So I'll stop there in the interest of time, but these are all such really rich questions.
Thank you very much, Heather, for your reply and also for joining this panel. Arturo, do you want to say something around the definition of work, or in reply to other speakers?
Something very brief, since I'm not an expert on work and labor myself. It's been a while since I read in that field. But something that I was thinking is that capitalism and the state, that work belongs with the discursive regime of capitalism and the state, with the ontoepistemology of capitalism and the state. And why do I say that? Because capitalism and the state, or capital and the state, require nature as separate from humans to be able to live and to thrive. It requires bodies as separate from minds and from emotions, so it is able to accumulate based on the extraction of surplus value from that worker, from that body in particular, which increasingly is the mind, as we know. So, but especially that capitalism and the state require the separation from nature, so to speak. So my question becomes, what would it be? What would become of labor and leisure in the context, and this might be a question that Melanie can help me with as well, to understand how those, something that we can call labor or work in modern worlds exists, what are the forms that it takes within indigenous communities, within relational communities, and beginning with the fact that in these communities, as I understand it, the separation between work and leisure, or leisure as opposed to work, is not there, at least not there in the same way. But work is the activity that people perform, and perform because that's how life is, for better and for worse, we can say that, in order to keep the communal, the relational fabric of life, the web of life going and healthy and thriving and so forth. So I think we do need to think a little bit more about how we can redefine labor within an ontology of interdependence. And that's what comes to mind immediately.
Thank you, Arturo, for the wonderful suggestion of rethinking labor, starting from relationality. And I have another input in the chat that is not a question, and from Sophie Lewis. She just suggests that emphasizing the senses in which paradoxically anti-work struggle might secure an increase in certain kinds of labor could help bridge the gap between some of the different perspectives on this panel. So she suggested to rethink the problem of anti-work struggles with revaluing also other forms of labor. Now, unfortunately, we are really running out of time, since it's 12 o'clock, and it would be great to continue this conversation. We are planning on having a final conference this year in May, between the 17 and 19 May. And during this conference, we want to have several panels on different topics that address the problem of revaluing care and also visualizing care. And I hope that all the people who joined us in this conversation will come and participate, and also our speakers today that I warmly thank again. Helen, Arturo, Melanie, and Heather. Thank you very much for joining us today. I want just to remind that we have some future meetings as well. The first one will be on January 21st. We will launch a panel on care and disability with academics and artists. And on January 21st, we will have a panel on digital feminisms, looking at the art produced by digital feminists. Lastly, we will have a panel also on April 1st on ecology and care, with many speakers, interesting speakers and artists as well. So thank you very much again for joining us today. It was great meeting you and having you on this panel. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.